بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. Our today presentation is about Dr. Abbas is going to present a book Why Nations Failed or Failed, and I think it's very good topic of our time and situation in Sudan at present. I'm just going to give an idea of Abbas, who might not know him before. He is our colleague, graduate of Abbas Khidr Ali. He is a graduate of Khartoum University in 1982. He, at the present time, or at present, is a critical care associate consultant in Giesinger Medical Center and Giesinger Commonwealth School of Medicine, Pennsylvania. Interestingly, Abbas finishes his MBA in Finance and Health, and he is a co-founder of UCANA. For those who don't know, UCANA is a University of Khartoum alumni of North America, and he was an ex-president of UCANA. He's also, interestingly, Abbas is a founder of Khidr Ali Mustafa, of philanthropic organization which works in health and education in Sudan, and is basically introduced and established adult and pediatric fundamental critical care courses, as well as critical care ultrasound and echocardiography in Sudan. That was being done in long time before. I think maybe Abbas give us a highlight at the very end of his presentation today about that specific. And they've been done a really great work at this field, and is still looking for in the future to, he can probably be participating in the same. The book today is a good selection. I think Abbas is about to give a highlight, and he already made a summary. I hope those of you who couldn't be able to read the book itself, the summary might be a really good idea, give a good idea about this interesting book, which, as he said, is run by two authors, Darren Akimoglu. I was about to say Akimoglu might be an African origin, but he just say he's a Turkish guy. And the other guy from the name is James Robinson, is a British person. And both of them are academics. So the book is written in an academic way, and they probably show more of a theory of about why nations failed. And more interestingly, I think they took two examples, comparing one. They compare Egypt to the United States, and the other one is comparing a city which is divided between two nations, the United States again and Mexico. And they are using some indicators, like, for example, crime rate, and then life expectancy, and then probably also per capita income of between the two nations. And it's just, as he said, a bit of a bias, because I think they know well America, and they just somehow biased towards America, in spite of the fact we have some points about why America is a good example. I don't, for my own, I don't know America much, but you in America might be giving. But I will let Abbas now. I will also welcome everyone over the globe, I can say, who is currently listening to this interesting topic. When Abbas gives his points about the book, highlights, I will give a chance to everyone who wants to raise a point, discussing or asking a question, and hopefully in taking just like to divide the time in equally brief, and in a short period of time try to give the point, and you be up to the point. Abbas, it's your time now. You can start.
Thank you again, Dr. Abdelbagi. As I mentioned, the book is about inequality in the world. And this is a very hot and continuously hot topic for researchers. There's a lot of research done to see why some nations succeed and others failed. And really, there are like very important books I will highlight just allude to them in my discussion, but because this is the main topic, so I will talk about this, and I will end by another book which is called The Bottom Billion as well. So why nations fail, as I mentioned, it's really very relevant to us. For a long time, Sudan, since its birth after independence, it's just a failing nation. And now it's not only failing nation, it is falling apart, unfortunately. So try to see here to find the reason, and then if you know the reason why you fail or why you fell apart, probably that is the starting point to recover. So as I mentioned, the book focuses on inequality in the world, and at some time as well, it is relevant to talk about inequality within the same country. The book published in 2012, and the authors were present during Arab Spring in Tahrir Square in Egypt. And this is why they started in their preface by Egypt, comparing between Egypt and United States. And they came to the conclusion that the reason of discontent of Arab Spring countries lies in their poverty. And I think Sudan is not an exception for this. So they throw the question why Egypt is so much poorer than United States. And then in Tahrir Square, they interviewed the youth, they interviewed some academics and some economists. So the answers were different. For example, the youth, the reason is Egypt is poorer because of corruption, because it is crony capitalism, and something, whatever, like what we are saying now in Sudan. The academics emphasize completely different factors, and they talk about geography, because Egypt in a desert, and it has not enough fertile land to feed itself and to improve its economy. Some people talk about cultural attributes, and they believe beliefs like Islam may not be consistent with development. And others say the ruler of Egypt simply don't know what is needed to make their country prosperous. So, but the author's view is totally different. They believe that Egypt is due to the extractive, what they call it, extractive political and economic systems. And this is why they put their theory. So they put the theory that countries that fail, they have extractive in political and economic institutions, and countries that succeeded, they have inclusive political and economic institutions. This is the theory they laid down, and then they have many cases presentation, almost like a case studies. They have, as Abdelbagi mentioned, they have they select certain cities or certain countries, same geographical, ethnic, cultural, and then they notice the differences between that. So all the books published about the inequality in the world or within countries, they lay down like three hypotheses. One, the geography hypothesis, and two, cultural hypotheses, and the ignorance hypothesis. The authors, they think these theories are invalid, and this is why they put their theories, and then they are trying to collect evidence to support their hypothesis. So about geography, a very important book called Guns, Germs, and Steel. It is done by Jared Diamond. He's an ecologist, biologist, and in his book, he mentioned that this poverty, the difference or inequality, is due to the geography and the climate. And he lays the theory that the civilization started in the Middle East because very 100,000 years ago, the plant species and animal species were more suitable for domestication, unlike other places. And he believed the West, for example, the Northern Hemisphere, is more richer and developed than Africa because of the axis laid down. So it's like America, West Europe, East Europe, they are all in the same line, the same climate, temperate climate, and Africa standing like an axis with different climates. This is one of his theories. And even after that, he published a second book called Collapse, and How Societies Choose to fail or succeed. He believes the people handle the environment poorly, and then the climate change, and then you have the desertation, and then the country collapses, and the neighbors just occupy the country and take it over. But fortunately, the same thing may be relevant in Sudan, especially when conflict is starting in Darfur because of the climate change and environmental changes in North Darfur. But fortunately, Sudan neighbors are not that strong, although they are meddling in the situation in Sudan. So the geographical hypothesis is what I mentioned, and this is the Jared Diamond, his book Collapse, supports the geographical hypothesis. But the worst part about the geographical hypothesis is the French political philosopher Mystique, and he believed people are lazy in hot climates and they lack in inquisitiveness, and as a consequence, they don't work hard and we are not innovative. This is typical of a French philosopher. Just they are looking to Africans. This is their look at African, and this actually is invalidated by the fact that there are certain countries that are very hot, but they developed despite that. So like Singapore, Malaysia, and Botswana, and this invalidates the geographical theory. Jeffrey Sachs, again, he's one of the supporters of geographical theory, and he believes these countries are malaria is endemic, and it's the reason of the poverty of these countries. And because they are poor, pharmaceutical companies are not interested in having malaria vaccine. And actually, he said malaria was the reason why Southern Europe is lagging behind Northern Europe, like Spain, Southern Italy, and Greece. These countries, they have malaria, and they didn't start development till they eradicated malaria. But again, and he believes the culture is non-productive. But the author believes the culture is, climate is, agriculture is not productive, not because of the geography, just because of the land reforms and the laws. The land is not evenly distributed, and the farmers, they don't have enough incentives like farmers in other parts of the world, so they are more productive. Cultural hypothesis, again, there is a German sociologist and argues that the Protestant Reformation and work ethics is very important, and it played a key role in facilitation and rise of modern industrial revolution. The authors, they believe it's not politically correct to talk about that, but I think some philosophers, they think Africans they lack a good work ethics, still believe in witchcraft and magic. And the same thing about Latin America, they are profligate, Chinese, Confucians, like Japanese. But when Japan was underdeveloped, they say, the Westerners, they say Japan is underdeveloped because of the culture of Japanese. When Japan started developed, they say, okay, Japan developed because of the culture of Japanese. The same thing for the Chinese, and the same thing for the Muslims as well. They say, for example, Bangladesh will not develop because of the Islamic culture, and then when Bangladesh start to rise up and develop, they say, yeah, because of the Islamic culture. So the culture theory is, again, is not standing up very well. And again, when they went back to Egypt, they mentioned the reason Egypt is poor because of the it was occupied by Ottoman Empire, and Ottoman Empire is typical extractive political and economic institutions. And then after the Ottoman Empire, they were colonized by English and then French colonization. And the third factor is the authoritarian regime with few political and economic institutions. And Egypt has witnessed a short period of development under Muhammad Ali, but soon that collapsed after the English colonization of Egypt, and they started to have extractive political and economic institutions. The third theory is ignorance hypothesis. They say, would inequality exist because we or our rulers, they don't know how to make poor countries rich? And again, the author believes this theory is invalid and they cited example of Nkrumah in Africa. Nkrumah has the best political and economic advisors. Actually, one of them was a Nobel laureate, and despite that, he really used political and economic exclusive systems. And they gave an example with poor planning. He developed the largest factory for mango processing in Africa. So the factory located like 200 miles from where the mango is produced. And again, it's more than that from the market. So just an example of the how poor economic and political decisions were made despite available good information for the leaders. And again, he mentioned the fairest welfare theorem. This is the theory which says that all resources should be placed where they are socially desirable. So it is not the ignorance of politicians, but it is the incentives and constraints from political and lack of constraints from political and economic institutions in their countries. And China, for example, it has reform created very marked incentive for agriculture, and subsequently it picked up the industry, and that is the reason for the current surge of the productivity of China, and it's almost dominating the world right now. So the ignorance hypothesis is not valid at all. So then, as Abdelbagi mentioned, they have case studies. They have like Nogales, Arizona, which is this is a city on the border between USA and Mexico, versus Nogales, Sonora. So it is a city divided between two countries, like in South Korea versus North Korea, West Germany versus East Germany. So if geography is the reason, Nogales is in the same geography. If the culture is the reason, Nogales is the same culture. If ignorance is the reason, Nogales is the same population. So again, they trying to support their theory. They say the differences between these two cities with the same ethnic group due to the difference in the political and economic institutions. The economic and political institutions in USA are inclusive, while the political and economic systems in Nogales, Sonora, and in Mexico are exclusive. Then they pose the question, why that difference in the systems? So they went back in history, how the institutions developed in Mexico and how they were developed in USA. The Spanish started to occupy South and Central America in 1492. And when they settled down in Mexico in 15, and the first thing they did, they captured the chiefs of the indigenous population, and they forced them to fill a whole house with gold and another house with silver. And when the chief in Mexico, he decided to cooperate with the Spanish, and he started to collect gold. He almost filled half a room with gold, and they were not satisfied. So they tortured him and forced him and his people to bring more gold and silver, and unfortunately he died from torture. The same thing in Colombia they did, and the same thing they did in the Cuba today, and they executed the chiefs despite they are fulfilling them. They're trying to do their best to bring gold and silver to them. And even they have two towns combining called Camara in South America and Jamestown in the United States. So the institutions in Mexico, Latin America, they were very exploitive to the people and very extractive. And then from there, they developed their institutions and economic institutions as well. While in USA, England at that time was not a strong, was not a dominant power in overseas, and they started to have their missions to America, and the Spanish felt that is interference in their domain, and they tried to get rid of them and to invade England and put down Queen Elizabeth. So they prepared a very big fleet of ships, and they call it Armada. And that is the most formidable by those time. But for the good luck of the English, a big storm came and destroyed the whole Armada, and the captain died and replaced by inexperienced captain. So Spain was badly defeated. And then that tipped the balance in the overseas in favor of the United States. I'm sorry, in favor of England. So England, when they start to come to America, nothing was found. Almost everything was taken by the Spanish, and the North America is just the one that's left over for them to take. And then the first town they settled in is Jamestown, and they call it James because it was the time of King James, 1606. So what they did, they tried to do the same thing the Spanish did. They tried to capture the chiefs and ask them to bring them gold. But Wahona Cox was so wise, the Indian here in the area of Virginia. It was like a coalition of 30 tribes, and they invited him, the English invited him, and he refused. And he said to them, if you have a king, I am a king, and I will not come to you. If you want, your king should come to me and not me come to him. I am not going to swallow this fate. ففهم اللعبة كويس, he didn't follow them. And not only that, he established embargo on them. He starved them. They couldn't even eat. And almost they died of famine, and they started cannibalism. And they ate it almost each other. And for that reason, then they, what they did, they start to go back to England, ships to save them. And then they decided there's no way we can exploit the indigenous population. We have to work ourselves. So they worked themselves very hard, and they give them land, but the settlers were not so obedient to them. And so what the monarch or the king of England, they gave Baltimore like 20 million acres of land to divide it on the settlers. So Baltimore, I think the state now or the town is named after him. Baltimore tried to create the same system like in England, have like landlords and then tenants and like different layers, and to exploit people. And then the same thing, the settlers refused to obey him, and they asked the monarchy in England to make them a colony under the crown. And the monarchy submitted to their request, and Baltimore lost power, and the settlers relatively became independent. And 1626, they asked the monarchy to make them a colony, and they did make them a colony. And I think they have the first elected assembly, and that made the base for the other 13 colonies became like some autonomously managing themselves, and they have their own assemblies. And from that started the Congress during the Revolution. So they mention about the inclusive institutions. They say that they allow and encourage participation of great mass of people in the economic activities and enable individuals to make choices. And the most important thing, they secure private property, and they have unbiased law. While extractive economic institutions called extractive because they are designed to extract income from certain people and wealth and divide it to subset benefit of a different people. So this is why they call it extractive. The same thing about the inclusive political institutions, their definition to it, you have it in detail in the handout. And definition of politics is the process by which society chooses the rules that govern it, so like some autonomy, and the distribution of power, like extractive, usually the distribution of power is narrow and is unrestrained, no checks and balances. But in inclusive, it is more broad, and there are checks and balances that constrain the politicians, and there's some centralization of a state that will help the authorities to apply the rule of law above all people. And centralization is very important fact. According to the Max Weber definition of a state, it is the monopoly of legitimate violence, not like what's going on in Africa now. And really there is a very strong synergy between economic and political institutions. So and this is what they call it, vicious circle versus virtuous circle. Vicious circle, extractive economic institutions will lead to extractive economic institutions. Extractive economic institutions reinforce extractive political institutions. And this is called vicious circle, while the virtuous circle, inclusive institutions, they vest power broadly, and they uproot economic institutions that exclude the people, and they support inclusive political institutions like a virtuous circle, and just they support each other, and this is why they dominate. So, and again, this is what I mentioned about the extractive political institutions slide. So why not then always choose prosperity if it is simple like that? The theory is that because if you want to make like inclusive institutions and distribution of powers, always are losers. And so these losers will resist any change. And this is why a lot of monarchies, a lot of coups, a lot of minorities, they try to control power. And once they lose power, they try to fight to gain power again. This is very extractive. And even in the English institutions during the Industrial Revolution, there was a very big resistance, even from the artisans. For example, John Kay, the inventor of the flying shuttle, this is very important. 1730, this is very important for improvement manufacturing in weaving and textile. They burned down his house. The artisans, اللي هو العمال اليدويين, they حرقوا بيته just because he is affecting their way of living. And even Lodis, 1753, they burned down the house of James Hargreaves, and again, most inventors got the same treatment from the artisans, actually, not only from the aristocrat. The only thing which supported these inventors was already the parliament gained power more than the monarchy. England, its civilization marched on despite Lodis' opposition. Lodis, I think, is a riot and sabotage and people. But on the other hand, in Austro-Hungary and Russian empires, they were absolutist monarchs, and actually they resisted industrialization, even the kings themselves, because and this is why Eastern Europe fell behind England during the Industrial Revolution. And so it is very clear that powerful groups often stand against economic progress and against the engines of prosperity. And this is what they call it a creative destruction. Yeah, when you invent something, or now Americans, they call it disruption, you invent something new, it replaces the old, which is equipment, which is the people, which is the political power. This is why it's always resisted. So here, this is very important statement from the authors about the resources, which is very relevant to us. So they say conflict over scarce resources, income and power translates into conflict over the rules of the game. So the economic institutions which will determine the economic activities and who will benefit from them. When there is a conflict, the wishes of all parties cannot be simultaneously met, like what's going in Sudan now. Some will be defeated and frustrated, while others will succeed in securing outcomes they like. Who the winners of these conflicts are has fundamental implications for nations' economic trajectory, and this is what they call it a critical juncture. If the groups standing against growth are the winners, they can successfully block economic growth and the economy will stagnate. In an absolutist regime, some elites can wield power to set up economic institutions they prefer. Would they be interested in changing political institutions to make them more pluralistic? In general, not, since this would only dilute their political power, making it more difficult, maybe impossible for them to structure economic institutions to further their own interests. Here, this is the focus, the main point about conflict throughout history. And the only way to change this political institution is to force the elite to create more pluralistic institutions. We will see that how the English forced their monarchy to give them power and shift the power from the king to the parliament. So, as I mentioned, the book, they talk about critical junctures, very important junctures. So in Europe, 1346 bubonic plague, which they call it the Black Death, that was a critical juncture in the history of Europe. Because Europe at that time, they have serfdom. People just working for the nobles most of the time, unpaid, almost like slavery, but it's a little bit different from slavery. So it wiped off half of the English population and most of the people in Western Europe. So there are few people to work. So the workers, they rebelled. They refused to work as a serfdom. And this is why they started to gain more power. Another critical juncture for England is the English Civil War. And then after that, when they defeated the Spanish and they have transatlantic trade, they have very good critical juncture. And then they were fortunate to take the upward rather than the downward trajectory. For China, the death of Mao Zedong was a critical juncture. Unfortunately, for most people in Europe and in Africa, Mao was a hero, but unfortunately, reality turned out to be not that, and actually his death was a good news for the Chinese. And for Africans and most of the people in the third world, end of colonialism was a critical juncture. So people who took over after the colonizers, they took their country either to upward or downward. And it is very important, the statement from the author, there should be no presumptions that any critical juncture will lead to a successful political revolution or to change for the better. History is full of examples of revolutions and radical movements replacing one tyranny with another, in a pattern that the German socialist Robert Michel dubbed the iron law of oligarchy, a particularly pernicious form of vicious circle. So people, when they take power, I think they just control the power and they don't share it with other people. This, he called it iron law of oligarchy or oligarchia. So they try to answer the question why industrial revolution started in England. Why not in Austria, Hungary? Why not in Germany? Why not in France? So they went back to the history of England. It is 1215, the English, they have the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, أو الميثاق العظيم. The king, usually they have people around him, they call the barons or baronat. Al-baronat, they ask the king to share with them certain decisions. You cannot make tax without consulting with the barons. And actually they made an assembly of 46 of them. And the King John didn't like that. Once they dispersed, he called the Pope and asked him to get rid of the barons, and he did. But unfortunately for them, they didn't give up, And 1265, the first elected parliament, it was just feudal nobles, not a democracy, but it was a parliament. And this intra-elite conflict continues, led to the War of Roses between the Lancaster group and York group, and the Lancasterians, they won. And 1485, Lancasterian candidate King Henry Tudor became Henry VII. And 1530, Thomas Cromwell introduced a nascent bureaucratic state. And this is the first time they have like an executive branch in the government. Then Henry VIII broke with the Roman Catholic Church. And the reason not because of any religious reason, because he wanted to marry, and the church didn't allow him to do that. And then he broke away from the church, and he confiscated all of their properties and their land, and they made them powerless. That is the only point I think there is a mention of religion in the conflict among the English people. After that, all the conflict between the English people is about trade, not about religion. But Henry VIII gave a big blow to the church, and after that, the church was become very weak and has become very powerful. So these are the Tudors. They call them the Tudors. 1603, Tudors were replaced by Stuart dynasty. And Stuart dynasty continue the same monopolistic way and trying to extract wealth and control power. And they have a statute of monopolies. There is monopoly of everything. Everything is monopoly by the monarchy and the people, very narrow elites around him. Even 1625, Charles introduced the forced loans. And what he did, he forced people to give him loans. And once he received the money, he changed the rules and the conditions of the loan, and he didn't pay, he refused to pay his loan. So that conflict continued. And according to this monopolistic behavior, another civil war, 1642, broke between the Charles and the parliament. 1649, Charles was tried and executed, and monarchy was replaced by dictatorship by Oliver Cromwell. That is the only time there was no monarchy in England. And 1660, monarchy, after the death of Cromwell, monarchy was restored. And we have the Stuarts, and we have the Charles and James, and they tried to continue the same story of absolutism and creative economic and political institutions, and another civil war broke. This is the third civil war. But that civil war was not so bloody. It was peaceful, and James was defeated, and he escaped to France. And the parliament called William the Orange and his wife Mary, and they made them the kings. But they have very important agreement and very important of shift of power from the king to the parliament. And 1689, they have Declaration of Rights and Bill of Rights. And the most important thing, monarchy could not suspend or dispense with laws. So now the king himself should obey the law and illegally to tax people without consent of parliament. But the most important thing, there should be no standing army in England without parliamentary consent. They even took away the power of having the military or from the king. And this is very important because the military throughout history played a very destructive role in development of nations. Actually, in Austria, when the Austrians empire elites saw the development around them in Europe, they asked the empire, we want a constitution. So the empire told them, we want a constitution. They said, yes, we want a constitution. Okay, you know that I have a military and it obeys my rules. Do you still want a constitution? They said, no, we don't want a constitution. They said, yes, this is what I think so. And this is why the military control and almost dissolved. Very important point in the history of England. An important thing, the parliament, although it is not 100% democratic, but they have this like petitions. if people, they collect signatures, submit it to the parliament, despite if it's lower than common, but the parliament really listen to the people. This is what it broadened the political participation. For example, there's a Royal African Company. It has a monopoly charter issued by Charles II, 1660. It has a monopoly on slave trade, and actually it bribes the kings. 1698, the Royal Company was abolished according to the request from the English people. They have petition of 60,000. So the parliament began a process of reform in economic institutions to promote manufacturing rather than taxing the manufacturing. Another priority was the parliament. For the parliament was finance reform. They established 1699 the Bank of England, so it's called financial revolution. By early 18th century, loans would be available to everyone who put up the necessary collateral and expansion of taxes base. More people were paying taxes. So the glorious revolution, as I mentioned, they call it glorious because it was non-bloody, non-violent. And then the glorious revolution was really the cause of the industrial revolution. Why? Because it is established strong property rights, very strong. And this is why England developed, and this is why till now they are sustaining their development, because of their respect for property rights. And there's an example of how the property rights were respected. And imagine you see what's going on in Sudan. There's no complete disrespect of property rights. If you have a car, you are a thief. If you migrate or work for 40 years, build a house, you are a thief. So there's no respect of property rights in Sudan. Another important thing, they changed the law concerning the land. So the land was held in so equitable states, which meant the land owner could not mortgage the land, lease, or sell the land. So the land is not a commodity. Land is only for benefit. This is till now in England and USA. So in Sudan, this is one of the worst laws, which is the reason of the civil wars in Sudan. I think the law for land reform. Another important thing is because of the respect of the property rights is the jump in the number of patent inventions. Because if you invent something, you suddenly become a rich, even if you're an ordinary person. And another thing, one crucial area was power. England was full of coal, and most famously the transformation in the use of a steam engine that was a result of James Watt ideas in 1760. Before the glorious revolution, such inventors were not allowed to use their talent, and everything they do was confiscated or and the most important thing in the economy of England and the world is the revolution in textile production, spinning, ginning, and weaving. And instead of spending 50,000 hours in producing a ton, it is now down to 500 and then 130 hours. Huge change in the processing and production. So as I mentioned, English textile industry was not only the driving force behind the industrial revolution, but also revolutionized the world economy. And an important thing, redistribution, not only the income, but also political power and further redistribution of income. And again, there's something called corn law was repealed. That's a monopoly. And again, the time of 1830 witnessed the revolution of in another revolution in France. Again, it's Charles X. Okay, so since this is the road for industrialization, what are the barriers to development? One of the barriers, example of invention of the printing press, 1445, the Ottoman Empire prohibited printing. No printing in the Ottoman Empire of Islamic books, and that took almost more than 300 years till they have the first printing press by Mutafrika, and it printed only, I think, 77 books, and then that stopped. And the first printing press in Egypt was brought by Napoleon in 1800. This is one of the reasons. Another barrier for development in China, one of the monarchy prohibited shipping. Chinese are not allowed to use their ships and sail, because shipping with open trade will empower people, and empower people will revolt against the monarch. The same thing, the absolutism regime in Ethiopia. There is like a myth called Barista John, some lost priest, and they believe it was in Ethiopia, and that's a long story. From Sudan, unfortunately, the authors completely omitted the history of Sudan. It's very good case studies for them, because it's a very vicious circle between military coup and revolutions. Only things they mention is Kingdom of Tagali in Sudan, and this, if you have the book, it's in page 241. And Kingdom of Tagali, example of extractive institutions, and they prohibited writing because that will make people more literate and they will revolt against them. And because there's a fear of industry, as I mentioned, the Russians and Australians, they stood against railway development, unfortunately. And even the Russian, there's only one line in Russia throughout the Industrial Revolution. And when one of the philanthropist, Robert Owen, actually, he's an English philanthropist, well known for among cooperators. He came to Styria and tried to persuade the empire to have more reform and to ameliorate the condition of poor people. So what they told him, we don't desire at all that great masses shall become well off and independent. How could we otherwise rule them over? So this is like throughout history, rulers try to control their people, and there was a fear of creative destruction and fear of industry and the railways. Here there is a mention of dual economy, and this I will go quickly through that. That is in South Africa, 1903, the law of the land, which is the land 87% given to Europeans, and 20% who represent 20%, and 13% were given to the Africans, and then the apartheid laws, and that continues to impoverish Africans till the 1980s, and they established the color bar, and the story is well known, and that because Mandela is behind the success of the revolutions of the Africans. The very important chapter 14 about Botswana. Really, this is very interesting for all Africans and for us as Sudanese. 1895, Botswana, like there are 8 tribes, constitutes the whole area. So they have the Boers coming from South Africa when they were defeated by the English. They have Cecil Rhodes, he's an owner of a company, and then he started just to capture African land and make the countries and name the countries after him. The Rhodesia, North Rhodesia, and South Rhodesia. He's north to them, and to their side is the German. So 3 big monsters surrounding them, and then they knew that the English were not getting along with this all 3 powers. So 3 of the chiefs, they traveled through 1895 to England, and they met with Chamberlain, the Minister of Colonies, and the Queen as well. And they told them exactly, they tried to make alignment with the English and England Queen for protection. And that worked well for the English because they have the German. If the German took over the Botswana land or Rhodes took over the Botswana land again, the English will be in trouble. So they bargained with them. And there are three of them. The three represented the 8 tribes. And there's very nice dialogue in the handout between the chiefs and the minister. And actually, they made a tour in England to support their case. And so the Chamberlain told them he wants a railway road. So they told him, are you, and there was an interpreter, are you going, it's okay for the railway road if you are not going to take our land, we are content to that. He said, no, I will take only the thing for the railroad. And if there is anything more than that, I will pay you, I will compensate you. And they said, that is fine with us. So these 3 chiefs, one of them, his name is Khama, and his grandson is Seristi Khama, born 1920, and he went to England and he studied. 1940, he married to an English woman. South African apartheid was so angry with England, and they asked him to stop that marriage. England couldn't stop the marriage, but they obeyed them. They didn't let him go back to Botswana, and they kept him in exile till 3 years before independence. Important thing, the Botswana people, they knew their land is full of mines, but they kept silent. They said if there is any prospecting happened or took place, the English was not going, they're not going to leave their country. So they shut their mouths till the independence 1666. When Botswana was independent 1666, it has only 20 university graduates, people completely poor and not educated. So fortunately, Khama, the grandson of the Khama who went to England, became the prime minister. He think Botswana Democratic Party. So he became the first president. The very thing he did is he took away the ownership of the minerals or subsoil valuable minerals from the tribe and make it the property for the whole nation. That's a very important point. And notice that he is the chief. Despite that, he took this wealth from his hand, from the tribe, and gave it to the government, number one. Number two, the other law he initiated is land distribution should be by the government, not by the chief of the tribe. And all they contended to that. That is very important point. And the other thing, because there is a cattle in Botswana, so they have meat board for export, and that was done in very equitable, very inclusive way. So Khama is extraordinary person. He was not interested in self-enrichment or self-prosperity. He was interested in the development of his country. So when the bears came for prospecting in their land, no bribes, the Botswana people, they enforced De Beer to give them 20% ownership of the company, and De Beer did that. So Botswana utilized the diamond for the prosperity, for infrastructure, for education, and the development of civil service. So, and now you compare Botswana to Sierra Leone, like Sonaca, Sierra Leone, or compare it to our country, Sudan. See how the politicians behave. They're selfish, not selfless like Khama. And I think the author thing, the thing which didn't mention is the kind of leadership. If you go and try to see leadership, I couldn't find very suitable Arabic translation for leader. Leader ما قائد, قائد is a commander. أنا أفتكر leader is زعيم. So leadership maybe زعامة. So leadership makes a big difference. Khama is selfless, a servant type of leader. unlike our people, they are selfish, self-serving leaders. And that is the reason why Botswana is successful. Botswana now it's a middle income country. Standard of life is like like Eastern Europe. And the GDP of Botswana is like $8,000, I think, a year. So I pose the question for myself, how long it takes Sudan to reach Botswana per capita per GDP? There is a rule of 70. Rule of 70, which is a doubling time for GDP. So if the GDP of Sudan is $2,000, it has to double twice to reach Botswana GDP. So you divide 70 by the percentage growth. If the percentage development of growth of GDP is 1%, Sudan will need 140 years to reach the standard of Botswana. If it is 2%, it will be like 70 years, right? Yeah, it has to double twice, 70 years. If it is 5%, it will be like 28 years. If it is 10%, it should be like 14 years, which is impossible. The only 10% in history GDP development was in India and China. This is a very big surge in the economies. So this is the very gloomy picture for us in Sudan, but I don't know, miracles sometimes might happen. So here, after this book, I think I found this is really very important, the bottom billion. How much time I have, Abdel Baghi?
I think we I will just try because this.
Yeah, I will be very brief.
Okay. Information, yes. You can take 10 minutes.
Okay, very good. So the bottom billion, a very important book. Actually, this was published 2007 by Paul Collier. Paul Collier is a professor of economics in Oxford University, and he was the advisor for the World Bank, and he's the head of the African division in Oxford University. And his book is The Bottom Billion: Why the Poorest Countries Are Failing, and what can be done about it. Very valuable book. I guess I have some few slides from it. So he says the countries at the bottom coexist with the 21st century, but the reality is the 14th century. This is exactly even for us before the Civil War. So sub-Saharan Africa is like 34 countries. They are in the 21st century, but the reality is the 14th century. So the people of 1956 country, دولة 56, I think they are off point. They didn't get it right. Sudan is not دولة 56. Sudan is even worse than دولة 14th century. Because 14th century, 1300, we have kingdoms of Nubians, Alawa and Maqarra. There is respect of law. There is a rule of law and respect of human life and property. But we didn't have that even before Alawa and Maqarra. We had Marawi, and and we have Ba'anchi and Kosh, and we have their values, people. So unfortunately, wake up, 56 people. We are no longer 56. Okay. So now he mentioned Collier. He mentioned there are 4 traps: conflict trap, natural resources trap, landlocked with bad neighbors, bad governing trap. Sudan, unfortunately, is really entrapped in all these traps. And although we have seashore, but most of the population away from the land. So unfortunately, and by the way, Botswana even was on 3 traps. It was landlocked, bad neighbors, has resources, but the good governance prevent conflicts, prevent civil war. So the conflict trap, it is the civil war and coup. And what the author tried to see, to postulate or to see, research what is the cause of civil war. They found that all these these countries plagued by the civil war, they have 3 characteristics. They are low-income countries, the growth is slow or declining or even stagnant, because a slow growth is the cause of hopelessness. People become like hopeless, and then they leave the country, and migration of people out of the country is a big blow to the growth. The third factor is the commodities dependence. These countries depend on commodities for their export, oil, diamond, or gold, اللي هو ده بيسموه الاقتصاد الريعي or rental economy. And Sudan, unfortunately, they have the three things, and they have the model, and they think the risk for civil war is 14% in 5-year period. So it's very high risk, but the growth of GDP, positive growth or negative, it add or knock off a percentage point. For example, if the GDP is 3%, your risk of civil war is 11%. If your GDP is 17%, if your GDP is negative by 3%, your risk of civil war is 17. If GDP is positive 3, then your risk is 11%. So it's vice versa. So an important thing he noticed in all rebel leaders, really I like this statement, rebel leaders who claim to have launched a civil war for the good of their country are usually deceiving themselves, others, or both. Almost all rebel leaders, they start initiating by talking about justice, but almost all these justice values were already eroded subsequently, and they are becoming more dictator and more selfless. And look around into our history in Sudan about the rebel leaders. Look about what we call حركات الكفاح المسلح, what they did when the revolution happened. So this is what one of the scholars, they call it, they changed the revolution to a marketing place. So why do civil wars last so long? And because they say the end of war is not the end of conflict. Being a civil war doubles the risk of another civil war, almost as vicious circle. Again, this low-income countries face a disproportionately high risk of relapse of civil war. And again, military spending post-conflict again remains very high despite the stop of the war. And the military again, it is a threat for democracies, and it is a reason behind civil wars, as we mentioned in the case of Sudan. And the authors try to postulate how long it takes the country to go back to a pre-war state. For example, for Zaire of Congo, it will take it almost like half a century to go to the living standard of 1960. So almost 50 years to go back to pre-war state. So for Sudan, to go back like April 14th, 2023, it may be like 50 years from now, till the year 2050 plus 2073. Sudan may go to that. And it's very important. I don't want to depress people or make people disappointed, but it is very important to set your bar realistic, because setting a high bar and with low performance, it's the reason of depression. So to avoid depression, to set your bars low, but people can work hard and try to reverse this vicious circle of civil wars. So if the civil war stops, another civil war is going to start again, definitely. So the cost of war is very devastating. Civil war is a development in reverse. It damages the country and its neighbors much worse than economic depression. It kills people. Losses do not stop once fighting stops. He quoted a figure like 70 billion, I think, cost of civil war, but in Sudan is almost multiple times that figures. And cost to neighbors can exceed even the cost to country itself. So what is going in Sudan now was a very negative adverse effect of on the neighboring countries. Another serious thing about cost of war or civil war, 95% of production of hard drugs is from conflict countries. This is very sad. And this is really, once drug gangs enter the country, it is like a plague, it's like cancer, it's very difficult to get rid of them. And you can look around in these countries. So the conflict trap, some researchers from Stanford University found the recruitment of soldiers for militias. They look for these militias, how do they recruit people? Why do they recruit people? They found these recruitees were young men, they are unmarried or have no children, they are poor, uneducated, for them life is cheap. So they take the risk of death if the chance to become rich. And this is almost similar to the drug gangs. So unfortunately, what we call ashawis now, just unfortunately, this is abuse of these young people. They should be in schools and universities, and people that are trying to, they are abusing them, unfortunately. And this is really very serious pool now for Sudan to have very young, uneducated men and poor. So this is very fertile soil for recruitment, and this will continue till God knows that when that will stop. So for the conflict trap, this is quotation from the author, the persuading everyone to behave decently to each other because the society is fragile is worth a goal, but it may be more straightforward just to make the societies less fragile, which means developing their economy. Civil war leaves a legacy of organized killing that is hard to live down. So this is really اللي هو اللايفاتية اللي عايشين الآن بدمروا في السودان and they don't know exactly and I think I will stop here. If there's any discussion or some highlights from the handout would like to talk about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abbas, for this very meticulous overview of the whole situation. And most importantly, what you did, you tried to take Sudan situation in the whole of this talk, particularly the very last end of the talk, which makes it more interesting. And it was really, really good that you take the prosperity, the chances of Sudan to go into that direction. And it's also more or less not only pessimistic, but it is sad that, but this is a reality. I think we should take that in consideration, that what we are facing now, Sudan is not only speaking, we're not speaking about prosperity, we are speaking about existence at the very end. I will now open the floor for discussion. If anyone who want to speak or add a point or had a question, please try to be kind of short and more brief of your point. And I just want to see if anyone want to talk. The floor is now open for discussion. I just can't see who is raising hands. If Abdullah can help.
ما شايف في ايادي مرفوعه يعني.
Okay.
If you cannot raise your hand وذاك يتكلم بس unmute yourself ويتكلم ما عندي حاجه.
Yes, anyone who wants to talk, you can just go straight ahead. While this is done, I think Abbas, this is the second book is also really very interesting too. And I was just because of the time and the much details. And most importantly, in the first book is the history and the background. These are really good, like they are professionals and they are more went into the side of more, I could say, more scientific points to support their ideas, which seems to be they took a lot of time to research all these findings to come up with their theory. I don't know, anyone has a question? It's really very interesting, and I think particularly that you took some time to put all this Sudan in all this context to give the talk. I could see Iman Sharif raising hand. Iman.
مساء الخير.
Go ahead.
شكرا دكتور عباس، شكرا دكتور عبد الباقي. كل عام والجميع بخير وربنا ينعم علينا بالسلام قريب في السودان. وبس أنا البوينت اللي ذكرها دكتور عباس إنه من التاريخ البريطاني إنه طبعا بريطانيا لم تشهد تغيير إلى الجمهورية زي ما حدث في فرنسا أو حدث حروب إلى آخره. الانتقال كان بطريقة سلمية. if I'm not mistaken أنا سمعت دكتور عباس بيقول إنه عشان الانتقال كان سلمي للجود governance وحفظ حقوق الملكية إلى آخره. عشان كده بريطانيا قدرت تعمل الاندستريال ريفولوشن if I'm not mistaken. فيعني أنا الكلام ده اداني أمل كبير كمواطنة سودانية إنه إحنا بلد منذ الاستقلال إحنا بنعمل ثورات سلمية يعني. وأكيد لابد one day يعني القوى المدنية الموجودة دي تفرض نظرة اللي هو الجود governance. ويعني حتى السودان يعني حتى لو لا قدر الله جاء رجيم متسلط تاني يعني الوجود المدني وحتى التعاون مع العالم ومع الإقليم بقى بيفرض على الدول ستاندردز بتاعت عمل معينة. وإحنا برضو من واجبنا إنه إحنا ما نزح بعيد ونخلي الساحة فاضية يعني لناس غير أكفاء يديروا البلد مرة تانية بإذن الله. فشكرا دكتور عباس. أنا if I'm not mistaken إذا أنا سمعت البوينت بتاعتك كويس this really gives me great hope إنه إحنا دولة potentially مش شرط industrial revolution بالمفاهيم القديمة، لكن إحنا في عهد sustainability، في عصر sustainability. فبإذن الله حاجات كثيرة هي في مصلحتنا. التغير الحاصل في العالم، ثورة الاتصالات، اللي هو العودة إلى الأورجانيكس إلى آخره. فده كله بلدنا بتنتجه من زمان بإذن الله. فما طول عليكم. I just wanted to raise this point. وبعدين كما ذكرت في الشات بعد الثورة لما جات الحكومة كان في سيمبوزيوم في بريطانيا في لندن عن السودان. فبتذكر في أستاذ بريطاني يعني كان مبهور بهرة، هو اشتغل في السودان ومن كتر حبه للسودان عامل بروجكت بتاع الديكشنري اللهجة السودانية مع الإنجليزي and it's an open project anybody can participate if we want. فكان بيقول it's amazing the Sudanese do not know what they've done to the world. فأنا كلمته دي أصلها ما قدرت أنساها. فمعناها كما تفضلت دكتور عباس يعني هو فاهم الأبعاد من الهيستوري بتاعهم ويعني وشايفين هم they're keeping an eye on التطور في السودان. معليش أنا دوما متفائلة رغم الظروف الصعبة. شكرا لكم وكتر خيركم. شكرا
لك. تفضل عباس.
شكرا دكتور ايمان. شكرا كما عهدناك في عهد التطور الزراعه والاقتصاد. فعلا بسموها الثوره الجلوريوس اللي هي الثوره المجيده لانها ما كانت عنيفه، ولانه كان في يعني تراكم من القوانين واخذ القوه they took away the authority from the king to the parliament. This is why it became like a glorious revolution and ثورة مجيدة, peaceful revolution relative to the previous civil wars. الحاجة الثانية البارلمنت أخذ authority وحجم الجيش. يعني this is very critical for the future of Sudan. We have to learn from that point. We have to, it's important to have a military to protect the government, not to overthrow the government. So what is going in Sudan now is completely irrelevant to Sudanese people's future. These are two factions, two generals just fighting for power, and they are not like Khama. It is unfair even to mention their name with Khama, and to mention their name in one breath. So this is why England developed with the Industrial Revolution. The other thing, other than the military, the land reform. Sudan has to witness a land reform, especially land should not be a commodity. It should be for benefit everywhere. فالأرض هي ما سلعة زي ما حاصل في السودان. الأرض هي للمنفعة. عشان كده لازم يحصل تغيير في قوانين الأرض، وهي السبب الأساسي حول الحروب دي الحاصلة في دارفور ومنتشرة لكل السودان. دي حاجة مهمة جدا جدا. بالنسبة للكومنت بتاع الإنجليش بروفيسور Sudanese don't know what they have done to the world. في بروفيسور محمود ممداني is very popular professor of politics and economy. He was in Macquarie University وبعدها كان في Columbia University. I think currently he is chancellor of Uganda University. He is originally Indian, Ugandan. He is well-versed person about politics in Africa, and he say in a lecture to Columbia University, he told them, if you go to Sudan, there are two versions of history. There are people who in the street, they look to the history from Sinnar and Darfur, their history. They ignore the all past history. If you go to University of Khartoum, you see the professors and scholars, they talk about history for 5,000 years. So unfortunately, we have disconnect from our history. And this may be planned or unplanned. I don't believe in conspiracy theory, but our education system is just crafted in a way to control our minds and to ignore that important history. And عشان كده حتى الناس لما دخلوا المتحف الطبيعي مع المتحف القومي ما عارفين ذات الموميات دي شنو. نسأل الله أن ما يكونوا دمروه إنه دمروا المتحف. بالنسبة لكلام عبد الباقي about المسألة مواجهة السودان existence، فعلا السودان مش failing country. السودان is falling apart now. It's really falling apart. والقوة الحاصلة دي قوة قشيمة. فما معروف how to control it. We tried نحن as a civil organizations to work together and to raise up our voice, but unfortunately, it is very difficult to bring Sudanese together. And even the people now, this is my personal view. I don't want to digress away from the center of the book, but people now in Ethiopia, and they are talking, they are off point from my standpoint of view. Because you talk, first you talk about inclusive political and economic institution, you talk about land reform, you talk about corporate finance, you talk about the subsoil minerals, gold, oil. You talk about that in a way Botswana did. So, but all what they talk about is sharing of power and then just some slogans. And I think the most important thing for Sudan to start is to start with the parliament. Like what happened in USA. They started by the parliament, and then the parliament really will distribute power evenly. And if there's time, we can talk about how to make a parliament during a civil war. شكرا جزيلا.
عبد الله الخير is raising his hand. تفضل عبد الله.
الله يبارك فيك. شكرا يا عباس. شكرا عبد الباقي. انا الحقيقه دار اسال اسئله وعندي تعليق على الكتاب كله. هو كان مركز على المؤسسات الديمقراطيه versus extractive institution زي ما قال. لو انت داير تفكر لكن البوينت استغربت في الاصرار على انه بيحاول يثبت انه حاجات الجبال المؤسسات الديمقراطيه المركزيه القوى المركزيه الحاجات دي هي السبب، لكن في نفس الوقت حاول ينفي other theory like geographical theory والeducation والculture والreligion، لكن ما جاب يعني compelling يعني evidence يثبت انه this is not it لكن his point is the point. يعني مثلا الغريبة جاب في الكتاب الحتة بتاعت إنه في 1448 اكتشفوا الطباعة في ألمانيا، وفي واحد في هنا العثمانية باسم شنو يقولوا على شنو بهنا دينية، يعني فتوى منع لحد أول printing press حصلت بعد 200 سنة، والeducation كان 2%. برضو في المقارنة بين ساوث كوريا ونورث كوريا وساوث أمريكا، أريزونا ومكسيكو بتاع، يعني صحيح دي في association مع بين institution كويسة، لكن في كوفاكتورز كثيرة، فهو opinionated. حتى أنا قريت كريتيك بتاع زول عن الكتاب بيتكلم عن انه هو يتكلم عن جاب 2 examples UK و USA انهم they develop لانه عندهم democratic institutions. الزول قال ليه ما هم they develop لانه exploited الناس ديل و exploited امريكا دي ما كان فيها عبوديه، يعني exploited slaves و exploited Africa وكده. دي نقاطي. وهسه في ظل يعني حتى ذهب لانه تشاينا قال لو ما في ديموكراتيك سيستم الديفلوبمنت ما سستين، وادعى انه this is it for China بدون evidence يعني، والحكايه دي ما حاصله يعني. لو انت وهو كان قاصد يا تو نوع من الانستتيوشن all the government institution ولا economical policies ولا شنو بالاكستراكتيف institution دي. يعني مثلا one example of الايفكت بتاع الريليجن. يعني انا هسي مثلا عندي اكزامبل بتاع الايفكت بتاع الريليجن، بفتكر انه مشكله كبيره جدا. الافريكان امريكان هنا في امريكا البيض عشان يبقوا عندهم ثروه صعبوا عليهم مثلا الوصول للفندنج، يعني الوصول للبنوك والاقتراض وكده. الشروط بتاعت الاقتراض صعبوها عليهم وكده. فالقصه دي خلقت جاب كبير جدا بين الافريكان امريكان هنا في امريكا والبيض، لان البيض كانوا يمشوا البنوك يقترضوا ويعملوا مشاريع وكده. انا بفتكر واحد من اثر الدين على الاقتصاد عندنا زي الفتوى بتاعت الربا دي، انك انت تمشي تقترض من بنك. في زول قال انه طلع ربا حرمت احنا ما عندنا بانكينج سيستم، ما عندنا اي سورس لفندنج لاي حاجه. يعني درسين انه احنا بنمشي، يعني كان ممكن يكون عندنا بنوك، انت بتكون انا متخرج طبيب بتديني فندنج ابني بيتي، وبتديني فندنج اعمل اشتري عربيه، واشتغل ال 40 سنه اللي اشتغلتها برا دي اشتغلها في السودان، واكون قاعد ومنتج للبلد. بيمشوا اغلب السودان يمشوا السعوديه بعد 40 سنه عشان يبنوا بيت، ويكون يشتغل الايفورت والريال انرجي عملها في حته ثانيه. انا افتكر دي واحده من الكاتاستروفيك حاجات اللي حصلت لنا نحن واثرت على اقتصادنا يعني. ف يعني قصدي في العموم association does not mean causation. فالزول ده جس خدتها في الديموكراتيك انستتيوشنز دي versus الاكستراكتيف زي ما قال. وشكرا جزيلا. شكرا.
عباس، قبل ما تجاوب في طارق حمد الله برضه رافع يده، اديه فرصه.
طارق حماده
طارق حماده سوري، انا قريت حمد الله.
طارق.
وبعدها ممكن ترد على نقطه عبد الله ونقطه طارق وتختم لنا اذا ممكن. تفضل طارق.
شكرا جزيلا عبد الباقي، والسلام عليكم نادي الكتاب، وشكرا دكتور عباس على التقديم. يعني عندي some points، وفي النهاية هننتهي بسؤال لأنه احنا لسه ما عارفين نعمل شنو الدنيا حاصل فينا ده. الحاجة اللي لاحظتها من الكلام اللي قلته ده mainly it is the leadership. الليدرشيب هي اللي بتودي وتجيب، الناس اللي عندها القلم، الناس اللي عندها الكنترول، وذر ملك وذر رئيس مجلس سيادة وتبر. الحاجة دي طالما الناس ما عندهم شيء بانه منو يحكم باسمنا، الموضوع بيروح. يعني لو ملاحظين كل التاريخ بتاعنا القديم انه للاسف الشديد ما كان في عندنا ليدر بنقول يعني كان عنده وطنيه كفايه بانه يتخذ قرارات بما يفيد السودان، كلها يعني controlled by جهات ثانيه. ده leads me to my question. في تحليل الكتاب بانه one of the factors اللي عمل التغيير ال end of the colonialism. ف do we really believe ان الكولونياليزم انتهت؟ هل الانجليز مثلا في السودان بس قرروا انه بكره يمشوا قالوا خلاص سلموكم ويمشوا؟ and I think they made sure انه عندهم some soft control بطريقه ما so they didn't just go. والحاجه دي ظاهره جدا في افريقيا من الفرنسيين اكثر من البريتش. maybe البريتش هم smarter جدا بانه they did it in a more sneaky way. الفرنسيين خلوها واضحه جدا لغايه ما ظاهر في النيجر وفي غيره هسه. الليدرشيب دي البوينت المهمه. الليدرشيب و what goes with it. الوباء اللي في افريقيا كله انه مشكله السيفيليان كنترول على الميليتري. دي حاجه ما قدرنا نطلع منها. الليله اللي بتسال اي سوداني في الاغلب الناس ما حيكونوا عندهم مانع تماما انه وزير الدفاع يكون اكس ضابط، ويمكن يكون رئيس الاركان نفسه هو يكون وزير الدفاع. اللي هو دي بصراحه لنفسي انا دي حاجه ما فهمتها الا لما جيت امريكا، ولما فهمت في انه what is this، يعني كيف انه الميلتري لازم يكون عليه civilian rule control، انه under the civilian control. للاسف في السودان وفي افريقيا كلها عند الميلتري ده بس خلاص فوق everybody. حتى في مصر افتكر لغايه هسه رئيس الاركان هو وزير الدفاع. فالحاجه دي لو ما مرقنا منها ما حيكون عندنا جيش زي ما قلت قبل دكتور عباس بانه هو يحمي الجمهوريه مش to be controlling it. Uh, I think what we need to have إنه يكون عندنا system whether we call it government or انتفاضة whatever we can call it، إنه لازم يكون we bulletproof النظام الحكم عندنا ده بإنه a military cannot just take over. nobody مش military بس ولا حتى باستغلال. يعني الهيستوري بتاع السودان بإنه في political parties استعانوا بالميليتري to take over at the end of the day في النهاية. وليه حس الناس مصرين بانه الانقاذ ما كان انقلاب عسكري، كان انقلاب من نظام حاجه حزبيه وذر الاخوان المسلمين ولا غيره. لكن في النهايه الواجهه كانت الحاجه دي how can we bullet proof نظام الحكم عندنا، وهاو يكون عندنا الحاجه اللي قلتها قبل اللي هنا انا كنت كاتبها نوت checks and balances وانت قلت البارلمنت. دي البوينت المهمه. these are the two things. البوينت الأخيرة اللي أنا داير أخدها قدامكم، لو زول عنده يقدر يستفيد لنا بالحتة دي أكون شاكر، لأنه لو أنا was researching about the book I came across الكيس بتاع البرازيل. بيقولوا from the 60s لغاية 85 they managed to كان عندهم military rule. they managed to get over الحكاية دي and remove the military rule ويعملوا civilian system ومتحدين. لكن في نفس الوقت ما لحقت اقرا كثير عن الحكايه دي. وفي نفس الوقت لقيت برضه another papers انا يعني I took note of it وحاول اقرا بانه الميلتري عندهم stealth movement try to gain power. فانا افتكر ده very relevant على السيتويشن حقتنا في السودان. فلو عندك فكره عن السيتويشن في البرازيل اكون شاكر و anybody can do that. دي الحاجه المفروض نعملها، انه نوقف تماما انه this will not happen again. الله يسهل والامور تتصلح، لكن الليدرشيب والسيفيليان رول على الميلتري دي اهم حاجه ممكن تودينا لقدام. شكرا.
شكرا لك. تفضل عباس.
شكرا عبد الله وطارق. يا عبد الله صحيح، هم انا زي ما قلت الاوثرز one American one English و there's some bias but it's not that really clear bias and it is fair. I mean they defended their case when they talk about Mexico versus America. They took the Nogales as an example, the same people, the same culture, the same climate, and the reason is the institutions And it's really true because Spanish, the settlers in South America and Mexico, they believe they are Spanish, while the settlers in America, they believe they are different. يعني they try to disconnect themselves from the British till the end in the revolution. It is true. I mean, even in the book he mentioned about slavery, it was devastating to the African economy, and even the Africans, they don't trust each other just from generation to generation because they themselves involved in the slavery. So really that eroded the trust among African peoples, and their system really is not perfect. It is completely biased against the black people from the beginning, and actually, but they took in a different way. They fought slavery and social injustice in a different way. When they start to write the constitution, they want to abolish slavery, but immediately the coalition almost collapsed and the revolution almost ended. So they left it. And then when it came to, and then slave is not counted as a person. When it came to voting, then the South, they asked for slaves to be counted for voting. You see, they have no power, but in voting they should. They come to an agreement, they left that to statement. So the statement establishes slave as, I think, 4/5 of a human being. So their history is very bad. And in the book, there is a case about, they mentioned South America. I mean, the southern part of America, like Alabama, Mississippi, Oklahoma, these were very extractive, dependent on slavery, and the income was lagging behind the North because of this exploiting of the slaves. And then there came the civil rights and the case of Rosa. I think that in the handout, Montgomery bus, which is very popular, and erupted the civil rights, which ended in like, which was led by Martin Luther King, and shifted the power from extractive institutions in the South to inclusive. And there's a very important point when slavery came, John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams. John Adams was the second president. John Quincy Adams was the sixth president. And John Adams and his wife, his son, were all against slavery. And John Adams, as the second president, never enslaved a human being in his life. And even in his farm, he never hired slaves because their owners may take their money. So hired only free people. He's very anti-slavery. And at one point, and he was the first president to move in the White House. And his wife, Abigail Adams, she saw two white people with their slaves working in the White House garden. So the owners were sitting in the shade under the trees, and the slaves were working. She was so angry, and she shouted, and they said, slavery is a big sin, and one day the country will have a very bad disaster because of the sin of slavery. And it turned out her prophecy was correct. Civil war erupted because of slavery. But the good thing about her son again, John Quincy Adams, the sixth president, when he was a president for only one term, he lost for the second time, but he came as a congressman. And he stayed in the Congress for almost till 1840 something. And he started to have regulations in the Congress against slavery. He created like a slave-free state in the North, and even to have a balance, they have a law which is to introduce any state to the Union. It should be not either one have a slave system, one doesn't have, to keep it balanced. So anyhow, even the Civil War, they have a lot, the black. Once after assassination of Lincoln, Johnson became a president, and almost they lost all the privilege they had. So slavery really, it is biased against the black people, but I think they are fighting like the glorious revolution in a peaceful way, and that is even more effective. They mentioned about the tools about prosperity, and there are two tools, education and technology, and that really flourish under inclusive political and economic institutions. And they mentioned exploiting of Africa, slavery. For China, true, they mentioned sometimes countries can develop under extractive institutions, and they are biased, all Westerners are biased against China. They feel threatened. China is a rising power. USA, which represents them, is a losing power. So they are not really well balanced in their view about China. And they said, actually, they expected that prosperity to end, but I don't think so. I don't think they got it right. It is true, the political institution is exclusive, but the economy in China is very inclusive. So it is open economy. I think it will continue. The effect of religion, true, they didn't mention the effect of religion. As I mentioned, religion is mentioned only twice. They mention it because of Henry VII or the VIII, when he expropriated and confiscated the land of the church. And it is mentioned only once in Mexico. The Spanish settlers, they formed something called encomendo. So they divided the indigenous people, and they are owned by Spanish, and they have to serve the Spanish settlers. And that really continued for a long time, till 1821. This is why some Latin people from Latin America, in their reviews, were very angry. They don't like to face that side of their history, but it is the history, so they cannot ignore it. True, الحديث عن الربا هم ما ذكروا الريليجن هنا، لكن ذكروا انه الجلوريوس ريفوليوشن عملت financial revolution وبقت very easy for people to have finance for project, and even the difference between America and Mexico, again the competition and the financial system well developed, competitive in USA. For Tariq, it is true, leadership it really matters a lot, and they didn't mention the role of leadership, but I think leadership it really makes a difference. For example, for USA, it was really George Washington who made USA, because he was not really power hungry. He was not interested in power, because he led the military, and actually he's the one who has this rule of military submission to the civil leadership. And they said that is to avoid brain failure at the top. So this is, and actually at one point, John Adams dissolved the military completely. When he felt that, I think if time permits, I can tell the story. Alexander Hamilton, one of the, they call it founding father, he's on $10 bill. He tried to use the military many times for political gain, and Washington warned him. He told him it is very dangerous to involve military in politics 2 times. When the war ended, Washington, he used to pay from his own money to finance the war, and he told the Congress he has $100,000, and he went home. And people start to discuss to make him a king or to make him a president for life. Anyhow, so when he became president, he stayed for only 2 terms and he left. John Adams came after him, and at that time, France really supported the revolution just because of their animosity with England, and they wanted America to be a weak and poor country and to follow them. But John Adams is a very strong leader. He didn't like that, and he worked very hard to be independent of France. So the French started to capture the sailors, American sailors. They tortured them, and they insert nails in their fingers. And so John Adams, because there's no military, John Adams asked Washington to come and help them with development of military. And Washington asked John Adams, he wanted Alexander Hamilton to be his deputy. John Adams refused because he knew that is not a good person. And when Washington insisted, John Adams accepted Alexander Hamilton to be the deputy of the military. Washington is not a power grid. Once he formed the military for USA, he left. He resigned, and then automatically Alexander Hamilton came to be the commander of the military, and he came to John Adams, asked him to declare war on France. So John Adams refused to declare war on France, and he used to say, "What a big guilt of unjustified war. It's a really big guilt, I will not." So he sent delegates to negotiate with France, and that failed, and that before the revolution, and there was a very big scandal. They call it XYZ scandal because the French asked for money, and then they came back, and then Alexander Hamilton came again and asked him to declare war on France. John Adams refused, and he sent another delegate for France, and they came to an agreement. And because of that agreement, good relation with France, Jefferson was able to purchase what we call Louisiana Purchase with $4 million. If John Adams got into war with France, that could not have happened. And the other thing, when Alexander Hamilton lost, he got so upset and angry, and he issued a big press statement during the election. And because of that, John Adams lost his presidency, second presidency. And people told John Adams, if you declared war on France, you could have won. He said, I don't want to come to presidency with my hand full of blood. So that is the sort of person. Alexander, he wants the military because he has ambition to become like Napoleon, and he wants to take over the power and make America like an empire. But John Adams discovered that and dissolved the military, and Alexander Hamilton completely disarmed, and he lost power. And that is the time America controls the military. If America started the vicious circle of coup, would not have witnessed the America we are living today. So this is one case of them about the military and leadership role, Tariq. What about the end of colonialism? It is true, the author mentioned that it's a critical juncture. But the post-colonial nationals, they didn't change the institutions. Actually, they moved a lot of checks and balances, and their power became unchecked. This is why most of them failed, unlike Botswana, who made they put checks and balances for themselves. About constructive, and you mentioned there is a soft control of the colonizers on the colonies. There is this term called constructive imperialism. One of the university professors in Oslo, he said the elites in the post-colony countries, they are more close to their colonizers than to their people. That's really very extreme views. يعني هم بيفتكر انه الناس النخب دي اللي حول السلطه اقرب لمستعمريهم من قربهم لمواطنيهم. ولاحظ السودان شوفهم يعني I'm not resenting them, but لكن they are more connected to the England and London. شقق في لندن والصيف في لندن وتذاكر للندن، دي كلهم الإليتس ما عندهم علاقة disconnected from their people. Civilian control of the military, as I mentioned, that Washington is the one who established that civilian control of the military. وفي glorious revolution they took it away from the king. The king should not have any military without consent of the parliament. So how do we have checks and balances? That is very essential, as Tariq mentioned. And any viable coming democracies in Sudan, if we are able to get Sudan back, there must be checks and balances. Because once people elected, they turn their back to the voters, and they have no restraint and no constraint on them. Case of Brazil, there's a very good mention of the Brazil in the book. It's actually Da Silva, 1778 was thinking the labor unions. They led a very big demonstrations and power, and this is why I think Brazil transitioned from military rule to civilian rule. Thank you very much.
عباس، في سؤالين أو شخصين رافعين الدون، حخليهم نسأله تواليا. عبد الجبار وبروف عبد الفتاح نور، وكمان في هاشم. يا ريت لو ممكن، معلش عشان الزمن، briefly and up to the point. وافتكر في عثمان السيمت. يا ريت طبعا الناس كلهم الاسئله جات في الاخير، بس shortly and briefly، بعدين ناخذهم الاربعه وبعدين ترد عليهم conclusively. اي زول يا ريت يكتب بس بوينت، وخلي عباس يرد ويختم. نكون كده يعني وصلنا للنهايه. عبد الجبار، بعده بروف عبد الفتاح نور، بعده هاشم، واخيرا وليس اخرا عثمان ياسين والدسيمت. تفضلوا بالترتيب.
عبد الجبار عبد الله، نيو كامر في الكلاب، وما عايز يعني ما اطيل عليكم في اخر الجلسه دي يعني. لكن I appreciate very much the functional reading of the book by Dr. Abbas, and he's very well.
الجبار، الصوت شويه ما واضح لنا، يا ريت لو تتكلم من السماعه ممكن تتكلم مباشره.
Okay. Yes. ممكن meanwhile ياخذ الفرصه دول ثاني لحد ما انا I can be next.
جريت. عبد الفتاح نور.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور عبد الباقي، شكرا دكتور عباس للعرض المميز الجميل للكتاب والإجابات للأسئلة. حاجتين يعني أنا I'm really glad إنك you mentioned بوتسوانا as an example، لأنه يمكن دي يكون one of the best secrets الموجودة في أفريقيا، وبدأت الديفلوبمنت بتاعتها as you know من بدري، وكانت هابروني اللي هي باكتواء جبروني، لكن هابروني هي one of the fastest growing cities، دي كانت حتى في بداية التسعينات. التعليق انه مش بدوا بس بالانستتيوشنز، انا I have the pleasure انه كنت زرتها في بداية التسعينات، ولصيغ شوية عرفت كثير عن بالذات ما بدوا to develop مش الانستتيوشنز بس، برضو يؤهلوا الناس اللي ممكن يقودوا الانستتيوشنز دي يعني. تجسوا بيبقى an example في بداية السبعينات أو نص السبعينات، بعثوا مجموعة من الرجال والنساء من الطلاب بتاعهم على أساس إنه يعملوا دراسات عليا ودكتوراه في مجال كان محدد جدا، لأنه they really wanted to develop a livestock industry بالذات يعني الكاتل اندستري، وكانوا بيصدروا من أوروبا لأوروبا من صحراء كالهاري. الدولة الوحيدة اللي كانت بتصدر بيف at that time من زي built institutions. بعدين برضو أنا داير أقول إنه بتستحق، يعني أنا أتفق معاك، بتستحق إنها نحن كسودانيين الدراسة بتاعتها كتجربة، وبرضو لأنه إذا integrated الترايبل تشيفز عندهم حاجة بسمينها زي الهاوس اوف لورد، بسمينها الهاوس اوف تشيفز، وزي 35 ممبر، وفيها البرنسبل ترايبز دي ممثلة، وتلقى في الصور بتاعتهم يعني تلقى الهاوس اوف تشيفز يحتوي رئيس الوزراء مثلا. المهم تجربة تستحق. سؤالي الحقيقة، أو لو ممكن عملت إضاءة أزيد شوية، الكتاب ما يتكلم عن دور الإعلام ونشر الوعي كحاجة مهمة جدا. فالإضاءة اللي أنا حابب بأنه how this could help in addition to دراسة التجربة بتاع بوتسوانا could help مثلا السودان في building institutions وكذا وكذا. واخيرا الشكر الجزيل للبوزيتيف نوت بتاعت الدكتوره ايمان. انا اؤمن تمام الجاي اجمل واحلى، والحاصل السعديه انا افتكر جسا immaturity بتاعت ناس هابين عندهم سلاح وهابين إنهم كانوا في السلطة. الثورة منتصرة بإذن الله. شكرا.
شكرا بروف عبد الفتاح. هاشم.
السلام عليكم وشكرا للدكتور عباس علي للسرد الجميل للكتاب Why Nation Fail. My question also related to the previous speaker. إنه يعني الكتاب اتعرض على الاقتصاد المستدام والانستتيوشن برضو في الدول دي. طيب إذا كان يعني لماذا إنه يعني نعتبر إنه في نمو اقتصادي؟ طيب النمو الاقتصادي المستدام يعني له بيعتمد على الشيفتنج من ال extractive institution to inclusive institutions، والحاجة دي ممكن يعني later on ممكن نعملها في السودان. وهل إذا كان مثلا اخترنا الاقتصاد الشمولي، how can this يعني stimulate innovations and technology and socio-economic growth? This is my question.
نرجع لعبد الجبار إذا ready.
Okay. I am a newcomer to the club, as I said.
مرحبا بك.
When I appreciate very much the well presentation of the book by Dr. Abbas and his functional reading of the book. Functional in the sense that it was critical to the extent of taking the Sudan case into consideration. This is very good, and that's actually why we read such books and we need to review them. الملاحظة الأساسية النقدية على الكتاب إنه تعمد تخطي نظرية development and underdevelopment from the political from the point of political economy. This is a big theory حاليا وعندها علاقة بالبوست كولونياليزم، وهي بتفسر actually في متحدث سبق انه قال هل فعلا الاستعمار طلع من افريقيا ومن الكونتريز المختلفه اللي كانت مستعمره في مختلف القارات؟ of course the question is no، لانه الحاصل انه الاستعمار ما خلى بس soft power، لا خلى باور كامله وراه. عشان كده في الكولونياليزم النيو كولونياليزم جزء كبير من الحاصل في السودان والتدخلات اللي شايفينها دي جزء من طريقة الاستعمار والطريقة يعني أعد بها نخب لاستمرار وجوده proxy government، يعني أنظمة وكيلة للاستعمار بيدير مصالح الاستعمار في بلدان اللي استقلت. وعشان كده للأسف يعني دي ونحن في ذكرى استقلال بميل الفم نقدر نقول إنه نحن حققنا استقلال سياسي شكلي، لكن ما حققنا استقلال اقتصادي موجه نحو التنمية والارتقاء في سلم الحضارة الإنسانية والديمقراطية والكلام ده. سوزان رايس ممثلة USA government في البعوث الدائمة USA في الأمم المتحدة، هي وآخرين كتبوا ورقة مهمة جدا مناهضة لسياسة إدارة بوش وفهمها للفيلد ستيت. إدارة بوش كانت بتفكر في إنه بوش الابن في مسألة إعادة تشكيل الشرق الأوسط الكبير والفوضى الخلاقة النظرية ديك، كان مقصود بها إنه to provide the pretext for intervention into other nations affairs. لكن الورقة المناهضة لذاك للنظرية دي كتبتها سوزان رايس وآخرين، وحددوا فيها معايير للدولة الفاشلة اللي هي insecurity and instability of a state و dysfunctional state and bad governance وده عنده علاقة كبيرة بالقيادة، وده مربط الفرس بالنسبة لنا في السودان. غياب القيادة القادرة على إنها to provide good governance. من المظاهر بتاعت ضعف القيادة أو عجزها إنه بيكون في dysfunctional economy، بيكون في inability من قبل الدولة لأنها to deliver on public services زي الصحة والتعليم وغيرها من الخدمات الأساسية، وعجز الدولة عن توفير الأمن. المعايير دي إذا عينا لها كلها بتنطبق على الحالة السودانية فيما قبل الحرب بفترة طويلة. مع الحرب كلام دكتور عباس صح إنه نحن بقينا مواجهين بأسئلة وجودية إنه ذاته for Sudan to be or not to be. فيعني بيكون كويس طبعا we cannot consume كل النقاش عن المسألة دي في جلسة واحدة، لكن this is على الأقل يكون مؤشر لأنه what can we do about the leadership question and the leadership dysfunctionality in Sudan. يعني this is a big issue فعلا محتاجين نفكر فيه as Sudanese intellectuals and Sudanese educated people. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا عبد الجبار. عثمان مسك الختام. عثمان انميوت وادخل.
السلام عليكم.
وعليك الف سلام.
Actually, thank very much for Dr. Abbas. It's a very interesting presentation, and the topic itself is very interesting. And I think it cannot be covered in one session. It needs a general session and a specific session for our country, because models are different. You cannot take any model and try to tailor it to a specific country. For me, just I think about the problem as a problem of definitions. Actually, a nation usually, because the title of the book is nations. A nation is a land, people, and constitution which organize the activities of people in that land. So, if we take this model into the Sudan, we'll find that there is a problem of definition in the mind of a citizen for the land. A citizen from the north or from the west or from the east, did he think that the north or the south or the west is his land? The concept of land is very, I think it's not well formed in our country. I didn't want to elaborate that much in that, but if we go down to the constitution, I think we have no constitution at all. And this leads to disorganization and failure. We cannot run a country for about 70 years with a constitution which is actually put for 4 transitional years in 1953. Now, if we come to another, the last point, which is the people and compliance. If you ask, or if you think about any Sudanese, for which system he is going to comply? For the Nazir of the tribe, for the Sheikh of the Sufi sect, for the religious leader who address him in the Jum'ah prayer, or to the local government, or to the local militia even sometimes. So there are so many loyalties which at the end lead the citizen to be bewildered. I think all the Sudanese are in a state of bewilderment. This bewilderment will lead to each one of them will try to think about his own convictions. That means any Sudanese will try to escape from all these compliances to form his own beliefs. Any Sudanese at any time you ask him, الناس بتقول كل السودانيين بيتكلموا في السياسة. Yes, because they are in bewilderment. In India, for example, any Indian, he will say Mother India, Mother India. We have no model of Mother Sudan. I wish I would go further and talk about slavery, but I think I'm not going to take much time. But I'm very interested also on the topic of slavery. And thank you very much.
شكرا عثمان. عباس نترك لك
شكرا جزيلا.
الفرصة للرد على
أنا agree with بروفيسور عبد الفتاح very good comments. وفعلا أنا بروفيسور لما قريت الكتاب وفي حتة بوتسوانا لفت انتباهي أنه أول حاجة عملوها ميت بورد. لاحظ الناس ديل حتى قبل الاستفادة من الماس عملوا الميت بورد وغزوا السوق الأوروبية زي ما قلت وأسواق العالم لأنه كانوا very inclusive. الليدرز ما كانوا selfish trying to enrich themselves. عشان كده عملوا الميت بورد. وبالنسبة لحكاية التأهيل الجامعات حقيقة يعني هم حاليا عندهم لينك ببرينستون، جامعة برينستون والجامعات اللي عندهم في بوتسوانا هناك. دور الإعلام ونشر الوعي طبعا ده very vital لأنه الإعلام لما يكون في inclusive institutions ولما يكون في إعلام حر بيكشف الفساد. لكن لما يحصل كبت للناس الإعلام الحر هو it can help يعني في زيادة الوعي ومشاركة الناس. فعلا دي السلطة الرابعة. لكن يا ريت لو نحن في السودان نستفيد منهم في الكتل اندستري والميت بورد. بروفيسور عبد الفتاح he is well known well renowned expert in meat processing production and marketing in the world. بالنسبة لهاشم الاقتصاد المستدام هو طبعا it is very important عندنا نحن في الاقتصاد بتاعنا it is extractive وفيه selfishness. فعشان نحن عشان نعمل inclusive institution في الايكونومي المفروض نرجع لنظام الجمعيات التعاونية والتعاون ونحمي التعاون. وأهم حاجة كمان نشتغل بالcorporate finance. دي نقطة مهمة جدا جدا. how can we simulate this? We can do that as I mentioned through cooperatives. وفي حاجة مهمة جدا الكوربريت فاينانس ده مهم لأنه عندنا السلع الأساسية دي المفروض تكون شركة مساهمة عامة مش حكومية، شركة مساهمة خاصة، الصمغ العربي، الذهب، اللحوم، حبوب الزيتية، الأقطان وهكذا. بالنسبة لعبد الجبار فعلا زي ما قلت أنا الكولونياليزم وزي ما قال افتكر باشمهندس طارق ما انتهى الاستعمار في النيو كولونياليزم. وانا ذكرت حكايه الاستراكشرال امبرياليزم الفارغ دي. وفعلا نحن ما حققنا استغلال اقتصادي، حققنا استغلال سياسي. الاستغلال السياسي مهم تكون عندنا انكلوزيف انستتيوشنز كل الناس يشاركوا في السياسه وفي اتخاذ القرار، وده طوالي بيتبعوا الاستغلال الاقتصادي عبر الاقتصاد التشاركي، توسيع قاعدة المشاركة عبر التعاون وشركات المساهمة. أنا ما قريت البيبر بتاع سوزان رايس لكن سمعت عنها كثير. معايير الدولة الفاشلة طبعا بتنطبق على السودان، ولكن أنت برضو اتطرقت للليدرشيب كويستشن. فعلا الليدرشيب it is very important زي ما قال باشمهندس طارق كبير. والناس اللي بيتكلموا هنا يعني عملت دراسات كثيرة جدا عملت عن the leadership. Who is the leader? What is the difference between the leader and the manager? leadership عندها certain traits or principle. Number one is integrity. يعني هنا في الوست لو كان president، لو local government، لو كان company، hospital anyone has no integrity will be taken off, power will be taken away from him. يسموها الانتجريتي. اللي بيقول لك integrity lose it once and for all. يعني شوف مثلا رئيس المجلس مثلا شوف ابدا من الرئيس نميري. he has no integrity. كان يساري وفجأة قلب يمين. it's okay إذا قلبت يمين تنزل ما تكون leader because you have no integrity. ما عندك مصداقية. شوف البشير he was a leader. ما هي مصداقية البشير؟ كم مرة بيقول أنا كذبت عليكم ولكن unfortunately كذب مرات ومرات. وحاليا شوف المجلس العسكري الليدرز في السلطة انقلبوا على الثورة، فضوا الاعتصام، عملوا يعني خطأ after خطأ ما يتعلق بintegrity of the leader. يعني any one of the current leaders by force now he lost integrity, so he's disqualified himself from being a leader, and they are commanders, they are not really leaders, and that will take time. Sooner or later this military power will be eroded and they will lose leadership. أنا أفتكر ده في الختام. وأنا زي ما قلت هم خطوا نظرية، لكن زي ما نحن قلنا ما تطرقوا كثير للدين، بالذات البريطانيين الدين ما كان مصدر نزاع، ولا حتى الأمريكان الدين ما كان مصدر نزاع. نزاعهم كله حول الاقتصاد وحول التجارة. الحاجة المهمة جدا اللي هو الليدرشيب، ما ركزوا على دور الليدرشيب، خطوا نظرياتهم. لكن أنا بفتكر الليدرشيب كواليتي لعبت دور كبير جدا في أمريكا، ولعبت دور كبير جدا في بوتسوانا، وكمان ذكروا ماليزيا. أنا بفتكر الليدرشيب بتاعت ماليزيا مهاتير محمد is really a man of integrity. يعني مهاتير ده لما نزل من السلطة ما حاول يأخذ السلطة بقوة أو يغير السلطة لمصلحته، وهو عمره 97 سنة. آخر اللي أنا شفت له المذيعة سألته قالت له بماذا تريد أن يتذكرك الناس؟ قال لها لا يهمني أن يتذكرني الناس أم لم يتذكروني. ده بالنسبة لي ماشي مهم جدا. ده بوريك هذا الشخص لأي مستوى هو selfless and he cares about his people more about himself. أنا شاكر ومقدر لكم لإتاحة الفرصة، وشاكر للأسئلة القيمة جدا. I think I have to review my review again. وألف شكر لكم. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا لك دكتور عباس بلا حدود. And to all who participate by questions or adding points or actually more valid points, and for those who are listening meticulously to what has been said, it will be more effective, I believe, if we get to present the other book on its own, particularly as the suggestion of Usman, to highlight more of the situation in Sudan. وشاكر للجميع كلهم بلا حدود حضورهم الجميل واللي خلى الحلقة فعلا تكون حلقة ثرة جدا. أختم بنص أو جزء من نص القصيدة بتاعت محمد المدني. أحتاج دوزنة تفك حبالكم عني وتربطني بكم. كيف التقيتم خلف نافذتي تجمهرت البنادق، ناصبتني الشر والخوف المسيج بالخمور. قربت بين النساء وباعدت بين النساء وبيننا. نادوا الوصيفات الشهود وكل خدام البلاط، وهذا النكوص يخيفني. سأدس باطن راحتي في صدرها وأظل أعلن أنه قدم من دبر. فكيف يرونني أحتاج دوزنة وترا جديدا لا يضيف إلى النشيد سوى النشاز. لغة تفتش عن أرض خصبة شمسا تغير طعم فاكهة الشتاء. وقتا أجاوزه لوقت قادم لا وقت فيه لباعة التصفيق واسم العائلة. هذا زمانك يا عمائم فلتقود القافلة. وشكرا جزيلا لكم جميعا والسلام.